The recovery room smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic when someone gently touched my shoulder. Nora. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. The surgery went well, a nurse said softly. Try not to move too quickly. I nodded weakly. My throat burned. My abdomen throbbed beneath the blanket. Every breath reminded me that only a few hours earlier, doctors had rushed me into emergency surgery so fast that I barely had time to sign the consent forms. Then she handed me my phone. You had several calls. I expected a message from my father. Something simple. The boys are fine. Instead, my screen showed 12 missed calls. Every one of them was from my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Harper. My stomach tightened. I hit call before the nurse even left the room. Mrs. Harper answered immediately. Nora, oh thank goodness. What happened? I whispered. Her voice shook. Your boys are safe. Safe? Why would you start with that? I asked. There was a pause. Then she said the sentence that split my life into before and after. Your father left them. They've been sitting on my front steps for hours. For a moment, I honestly thought the anesthesia was making me hear things. My dad left. I found your oldest knocking on my door. He said Grandpa drove away. The heart monitor beside my bed began beeping faster. The nurse glanced over. Nora, you need to stay calm. Stay calm. I couldn't even sit up. Where are my boys now? I asked. They're inside with me. They've eaten, but they've been asking when you're coming home. I closed my eyes. My father had promised me. Not casually. Not as a favor squeezed into his schedule. He had looked me in the eye outside the emergency department while nurses were preparing to wheel me away. I'll stay with them, he'd said. Don't worry about a thing. I had believed him. I kissed both of my sons goodbye, forced a smile through the fear, and let the operating room doors close because I thought the one thing I didn't have to worry about was them. Now I learned they had spent the afternoon wondering where everyone had gone. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. I immediately called my father. He answered on the second ring. What? No concern. No apology. No, how are you? Just irritation. Dad, my voice cracked. Mrs. Harper said you left the boys. I did. I waited for the explanation. It never came. Emily needed me. My sister. She had a nail appointment. I stared at the ceiling. And what? It was already scheduled. I honestly thought I'd misunderstood him. You left my children alone while I was in surgery. They weren't alone forever, he replied. Stop being dramatic. I could barely breathe. They're 7 and 5. They're old enough to sit still for a little while. The nurse noticed tears running down my face. She stepped closer. Is everything okay? I couldn't answer. My father continued speaking as though we were discussing grocery shopping instead of two frightened little boys. Emily couldn't miss her appointment. She booked it weeks ago. And I was in emergency surgery. You survived, didn't you? The room went completely silent. Even through the haze of pain medication, those 4 words landed with terrifying clarity. You survived, didn't you? Not. How are the boys? Not. How did surgery go? Just an excuse. Justification. As though surviving somehow erased what he'd done. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. You abandoned my sons. I prioritized the child who actually needed me. I almost laughed. Emily was 30 years old. She wasn't stranded. She wasn't sick. She wasn't in danger. She wanted someone to drive her to a nail appointment. My father chose that over the promise he'd made to me. Over his grandsons. Over the daughter lying in a hospital bed, recovering from emergency surgery. I need to leave, I told the nurse. She gently shook her head. I'm sorry, the doctor hasn't cleared you yet. My children. We're monitoring you for post-operative complications. You can't leave. The helplessness was unbearable. I couldn't protect my boys. I couldn't even get out of bed. Mrs. Harper promised she'd stay with them until I came home, but guilt settled over me anyway. I had trusted the wrong person. My father ended the call with one final sentence. Call me when you've calmed down. The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen in my hand. For years, I had convinced myself that Dad simply showed love differently. That he didn't mean the things he said. That he wasn't really choosing my younger sister over me. But lying there, unable to reach my own children, because the man I trusted most had walked away from them for a manicure, one question refused to leave my mind. If he could abandon my sons while I was lying unconscious in an operating room, what else had I spent my entire life refusing to see? By the time the doctor discharged me, the sun had already dropped behind the houses. Mrs. Harper met us at my front door with both boys wrapped in blankets. My youngest, Caleb, ran toward me so fast that I nearly lost my balance. Mommy. He buried his face against my side. Pain shot through my incision, but I held him anyway. My older son, Mason, stood a few feet away. He was usually the first one to talk. That night, he said nothing. Mrs. Harper lowered her voice. They were very brave. Mason looked at the floor. I kept Caleb quiet, he said, because you were at the hospital. I crouched as carefully as I could. You didn't have to take care of everything. He finally looked at me. Grandpa said he'd be back soon. The words came out small. Then he asked, did he leave because he didn't want us anymore? My throat closed. No, I said immediately. None of this was your fault. But even as I said it, years of memories began lining up in my head. My father had always called me the strong one. When Emily forgot a bill, he paid it. When she missed work, he made excuses for her. When she needed a babysitter, I was expected to cancel my plans. Nora never complains. Dad would tell relatives proudly. What he meant was that Nora would absorb the inconvenience. I had missed birthdays to watch Emily's children. I had cut a vacation short when Dad needed help moving furniture. Every time I gave something up, he called me dependable. Every time I needed something, he told me not to be difficult. That night, after the boys finally fell asleep beside me, I checked my phone. There were 3 messages from Dad. None asked whether the surgery had gone well. None asked whether his grandsons were safe. The newest message read, "Call me when you calm down." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then my phone rang. Dad. I answered quietly, so I wouldn't wake the boys. You've upset Emily, he said. I looked at Mason's hand, gripping the edge of my blanket even in his sleep. She left my children alone. No, I did. The bluntness stopped me. Dad continued, and I had a reason. A nail appointment. It was important to her. My surgery was important to me. You always manage, Nora. There it was. Not an apology. An expectation. Because I had survived every previous disappointment, he believed I would survive this one too. I lowered my voice. Mason thinks you left because you don't want him. Dad sighed. Children get emotional. He'll forget. No, he won't. You are making this worse than it needs to be. I looked around my dark bedroom. Both of my sons had refused to sleep in their own rooms. They needed to see me breathing. Dad had reduced their fear to an inconvenience. Then he said, "You're making your sister look like the villain. She did nothing wrong." I tightened my grip on the phone. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to smooth things over. I didn't apologize. I didn't tell him we would talk after everyone calmed down. I simply said, "Then maybe everyone needs to hear exactly what you did." The line went silent. Richard moved faster than I expected. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. The family group chat, normally filled with birthday reminders and holiday photos, had turned into a courtroom. Emily sent the first message. "I can't believe people are attacking me over a manicure." Before I could respond, my aunt replied, "Surely this is just a misunderstanding." Then Dad chimed in. "Nora is emotional because of surgery. She'll realize she's overreacting once she rests." I stared at the screen. He wasn't denying what he'd done. He was changing the story. Within minutes, cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months were telling me to let it go. "He's your father. He didn't mean any harm." Families shouldn't fight over one mistake. One mistake. My sons had spent hours wondering if anyone was coming back for them, and somehow I was the one creating the family problem. I locked my phone and walked into the living room. Mason and Caleb were building a blanket fort together. Every few minutes, Caleb looked toward the front window. Not because he expected Grandpa, because he wanted to make sure I hadn't disappeared too. That afternoon, Aunt Linda called. "We're having dinner Sunday," she said carefully. "Everyone thinks it's best if we clear the air." I almost declined. Then I remembered Mason's question. Grandpa didn't want us anymore. "No," I answered. "I'll be there." Sunday evening, every seat around my aunt's dining table was filled. Emily sat beside Dad. He looked completely relaxed, greeting everyone with his usual smile, as though nothing significant had happened. After dinner, Aunt Linda folded her hands. "Richard," she said, "why don't you explain what happened?" Dad nodded confidently. I stepped away for a little while. He looked directly at me. The boys were perfectly safe. I didn't interrupt. He continued. "I intended to come right back." Emily added quietly, "People are acting like I forced him." Dad spread his hands. "Nora was heavily medicated after surgery. I think she's remembering things as worse than they actually were." Several relatives nodded. I reached into my purse. Without saying a word, I placed my tablet on the table. I'd like everyone to watch something. The room grew quiet. I pressed play. Mrs. Harper's security camera filled the screen. The timestamp appeared in the corner. Dad's car backed out of my driveway. The boys waved from the front window. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then another. The footage showed Mason opening the front door, stepping outside, and looking up and down the street. He waited. Nothing. Nearly 3 hours after Dad drove away, Mason walked Caleb next door. Mrs. Harper opened her front door immediately and hurried both boys inside. No one spoke. The only sound was the tablet finishing the video. Dad cleared his throat. Security cameras don't tell the whole story. Before anyone else could answer, my cousin Daniel leaned forward. "They tell enough." Dad looked at him. Daniel continued, "Mrs. Harper called you 4 times. Dad's face changed. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Because she called me after you ignored her." Silence spread across the room. Emily shifted uncomfortably. "My appointment had already been paid for," she muttered. Every eye turned toward her. No one responded. The sentence sounded even smaller now than it had over the phone. Dad tried once more. "I didn't think they'd panic." "They're 7 and 5, Aunt Linda said quietly. Another silence settled over the table. This one felt different. Not uncertain. Disappointed. Several relatives who had defended Dad in the group chat suddenly avoided looking at him. Others still crossed their arms, unwilling to admit they judged me too quickly. The family wasn't united anymore. It had split straight down the middle. I slowly reached beside my chair and lifted a thick manila folder onto the dining table. The sound echoed through the room. Dad frowned. "What's that?" I looked at everyone before answering. "None of you know what happened after I left the hospital. No one reached for the folder. For several long seconds, every person at the table simply stared at it. Dad folded his arms. If this is another attempt to embarrass me. It isn't, I interrupted. It's everything I did before 9 o'clock the night of my surgery. I opened the folder. The first document slid across the table. This is the updated emergency contact form. I placed another beside it. This is the new school pickup authorization. Then another. These are the revised daycare permissions. Another. My medical proxy. Another. My estate plan. The stack grew until the center of the table disappeared beneath neatly organized paperwork. Finally, I looked directly at my father. Your name isn't on a single one anymore. Emily blinked. You already changed all of this. The same night. Dad gave a short, disbelieving laugh. So you punished me with paperwork? No. I kept my voice calm. I protected my children with paperwork. No one spoke. I continued. While you were explaining to Emily why her appointment couldn't be missed, I was lying in recovery, wondering whether my sons had eaten dinner. I turned another page. I realized something that night. If I couldn't trust you during the biggest emergency of my life, I couldn't trust you with the next one. Aunt Linda slowly picked up one of the documents. You removed him from everything. Everything. Dad leaned forward. You seriously think one mistake justifies this? Before I answered, another voice came from the doorway. It wasn't one mistake. Everyone turned. Mrs. Patel, the child counselor who had begun seeing Mason after the incident, had agreed to attend only because I had asked whether she could explain something the family wasn't understanding. She remained professional. I'm not here to take sides. She looked around the room. I'm here to explain what abandonment feels like to a child. Dad rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. She ignored the interruption. Mason described sitting by the window because Grandpa promised he would come back. She paused. When the hours passed, he decided his job was to keep his younger brother from crying. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Patel continued gently. He wasn't thinking like a 7-year-old anymore. He was thinking like someone who believed the adults had stopped protecting him. The room became painfully quiet. Dad finally spoke. They're kids. They'll move on. Mrs. Patel answered without raising her voice. Children move forward. They don't automatically forget. She looked at me. They remember who made them feel safe. That sentence settled over the table like a weight. Dad's jaw tightened. This is unbelievable. He pointed toward the paperwork. You're turning one afternoon into a permanent sentence. I met his stare. No. You turned one afternoon into a permanent decision. He pushed his chair back. So now I'm the villain. No. You made yourself one. His face reddened. You've always been dramatic. And you've always forgiven me. He said it before he realized what he'd admitted. The room went silent again. Even Dad seemed to recognize what had slipped out. I slowly unlocked my phone. I found something else. I connected it to the television in Aunt Linda's dining room. A call log appeared. I requested my phone records. One by one, I highlighted the entries. Mrs. Harper. 4 missed calls. The hospital. 2 missed calls. The surgeon's office. 1 missed call. Every one of them had reached Dad's phone while he was away. Every one of them had gone unanswered. I looked at him. You didn't just leave. You ignored every opportunity to come back. Emily covered her mouth. I didn't know. I believed her. She had assumed Dad had everything under control. Dad looked around the room, searching for someone to defend him. No one spoke. Finally, he shrugged. I knew the boys were probably fine. In the hospital, I asked, you never wondered whether your daughter survived surgery? He didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. For the first time all evening, Emily turned toward him instead of me. Dad. Her voice cracked. Why didn't you answer? He looked away. I didn't want interruptions. The words hung in the air. Not excuses. Not misunderstandings. A choice. A deliberate one. Dad looked back at me, his confidence returning just enough for one final attempt. You'll cool off. You always do. You'll get over this. I closed the folder. Then I stood. No. I looked him directly in the eyes. That version of me stayed in the operating room. Before anyone could respond, the family attorney, who had quietly observed the entire conversation at Aunt Linda's request, cleared his throat. He opened his briefcase. I think, he said calmly, everyone here needs to understand exactly what Mr. Bennett's decisions have permanently cost him. The attorney laid a slim leather folder on the table and adjusted his glasses before speaking. I've reviewed every document Nora signed the evening she left the hospital. No one interrupted him. He looked directly at my father. Everything was completed properly. Dad leaned back in his chair. She can't just erase me because she's angry. The attorney didn't react. She didn't. He opened the folder. She exercised her legal right as a parent. He began listing each document. The school has been notified. The daycare has acknowledged the changes. Her pediatrician has updated the emergency contact records. The hospital has removed your authorization. He paused. You are no longer authorized to pick up either child, consent to medical treatment on their behalf, or act for Ms. Bennett in any emergency. Dad's expression hardened. That's ridiculous. No, the attorney replied evenly. It's the consequence of broken trust. Silence settled over the dining room. I finally spoke. When I signed those papers, I wasn't thinking about punishment. I was thinking about the next emergency. I looked around the table. I asked myself one question. If another ambulance ever takes me away, who would I trust to choose my boys over everyone else? I turned toward my father. And I realized I no longer knew your answer. He opened his mouth. I continued before he could speak. I nearly went into surgery believing my children were safe because you promised me they would be. I never imagined I'd wake up to learn my neighbor had protected them instead. No one looked at Dad anymore. Everyone looked at the floor. Then Mason quietly spoke from the hallway. He had come downstairs without anyone noticing. I wasn't scared. He hesitated. I just didn't want Caleb to cry. Every adult turned toward him. He looked at his little brother, sleeping on the couch in Aunt Linda's den. So I told him Grandpa probably got lost. His voice became almost a whisper. I didn't want him to think nobody was coming. Emily burst into tears. She covered her face. Oh, Mason. He looked at her politely. I wasn't mad about your nails. I just wanted Grandpa. The room fell completely silent. Emily wiped her eyes and turned toward me. I swear, I didn't know he left them. I thought he was just giving me a ride and going straight back. I believed her. This wasn't the moment to destroy my sister. It was the moment to expose the decision that had started everything. I faced my father. This isn't Emily's responsibility. He looked surprised. She didn't make a promise to me. You did. You looked me in the eye before they wheeled me into surgery. You promised. His shoulders sagged for the first time that evening. Not from remorse. From finally realizing no one was accepting another excuse. One by one, relatives began speaking. Aunt Linda quietly said, You lied to all of us. My cousin Daniel nodded. You told us Nora exaggerated. Another aunt added, "You never said the boys were alone for hours." Nobody raised their voice. They didn't have to. The disappointment was louder than shouting. Over the following weeks, something changed without anyone announcing it. Family barbecues happened. Dad wasn't asked to organize them. Birthday parties were planned. Someone else volunteered to supervise the grandchildren. School events came and went. No one automatically assumed Grandpa would be there. He called often, sometimes twice in one day. I've learned my lesson. I deserve another chance. I've always been there for this family. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer out of guilt. Sometimes I didn't answer at all. When I did, my response never changed. Accountability comes before access. Trust wasn't rebuilt with promises. It was rebuilt with actions over time. And my children's peace wasn't something I was willing to gamble with again. Months passed. Mason stopped asking whether people would come back. Caleb slept through the night again. Mrs. Harper became more than the kind woman next door. She became someone my boys instinctively trusted. Not because she shared our last name. Because when two frightened little boys knocked on her door, she opened it without hesitation. Our family gatherings became smaller, quieter, healthier. The constant pressure to pretend everything was fine disappeared. For the first time, peace didn't come from me sacrificing myself to keep everyone comfortable. It came from protecting the people who depended on me most. Looking back, I don't remember the pain from the surgery as clearly as I remember waking up to those 12 missed calls. That was the moment everything changed. The day my father chose a nail appointment over my son's was the day he stopped being the person I trusted. And the day I finally became the mother my boys needed.